was looking for any excuse to be outside. And rationalized that as long as I was drawing something outside, I was still doing my job, but outside. And I was lucky that someone had given me some sidewalk chalk as a joke. And so I took that outside and figured I'm brainstorming. That's what I'm doing. I'm brainstorming out on the sidewalk. And that kind of opened the floodgates wide. Because the sidewalk, as it turns out, it's the opposite of a blank canvas. And I realized the problem I'd had with making art to be art is that the blank canvas gave me nothing to work with. It was too much freedom to do anything I wanted, and suddenly there was nothing I wanted to do. But a good, messy, cracked, spotted sidewalk on a beautiful day that's going to end in a few hours, it kicks you into gear. So it became art for art's sake. It just sort of snuck in from the side. I was a very shy kid, and I found that sitting quietly, not talking to people, looks really weird, and people find that unsettling. But sitting in a place looking down because you're so focused on the drawing that you're doing on that one scrap of paper that you have, it's still weird, but it's a little less weird. You clearly have something very interesting that you're focusing on, and that's why you're not talking to people. You would talk to people, you would love to talk to people, but you have to do this first. And so I used it as a crutch to avoid human contact, which is wonderfully ironic because now it's the main reason I talk to people. As a shy person, historically shy person, just walking around on the streets like a normal person is vaguely stressful because there's that fear that maybe you're doing it wrong. And maybe people are quietly making fun of you for not knowing how to walk down the street like a normal person. It's the kind of shy I was. And in a weird way, if you, right out of the box, do something completely out of the norm, like crawling on the ground with a box of Crayolas, you don't have to worry anymore about whether people are going to think you're doing normal wrong, because that's clearly not what you're trying to do. And you create this interesting, safe bubble of art weirdness that explains why you're not acting like a normal person, because you've got this thing you got to do. The drawings I do now, in a very happy way, have no agenda. They have no reason to be there. They're not trying to accomplish anything, which I like, because not having a specific goal in mind frees them up to accidentally accomplish so many other things that a specifically focused, pointed piece of art can't do. If you put a very specific message into your art, it's hard for people to get anything other than that message out of it. And if they don't get that message, somehow you've failed. It's interesting that since I'm making art in public, a lot of people do come talk to me while I'm drawing. And the number one question is, aren't you going to be sad when it rains? Which is weird, because it's almost like they're sad that I'm not sad that it's going to rain. And it's tricky to explain, but it's important that it rains. It's important that this goes away. Because if that was a permanent piece of art, for one thing, I'd either have spent months getting permission, or I'd be watching for the cops, which is not as much fun. But also the fact that it's not going to stick around means I don't have to worry about whether it's good enough to stick around. And there's a lot of freedom that I think everyone should embrace, and many people do when they doodle while they're on the phone, of just drawing what makes you happy in that moment and not worrying about what you're going to do with it later. If you're painting a canvas with really expensive paints in the hopes that someone will hang it in a museum, it's a lot of obstacles to just enjoying yourself, because it's a lot of stress. I'm fairly certain that the first time I drew a flying pig, it was kind of an accident and kind of the result of giving into pressure from a little girl. Because I'd just been spending the last few weeks just drawing wings on things that shouldn't have wings. And it took a little girl to say, why don't you draw a pig with wings? Okay. Yeah, that's another thing that shouldn't have wings. It didn't even occur to me at the time that that is a pretty important symbol, at least in this part of the world, because of the phrase, that'll happen when pigs fly, which I now think about a lot because I draw a lot of flying pigs. They don't say that'll happen when pigs fly in Sweden. Supposedly they say that'll happen when it rained peas. The only real trick of 3D street art, or 3D art in any form, which is called anamorphosis, is that things have to get distorted so that they look three-dimensional from one very specific viewpoint. The photographs that you see of 3D chalk art look real because the camera is in exactly one perfect place. So I'd have to go down to the ground and crouch on it, and I'd start drawing and get really excited about what I was drawing, and then realize sometimes after an hour or more that what I'd drawn looked very realistic and would look very 3D to anyone else who was also crawling on the ground in the exact spot where I had been for the last hour, but only to those people, which was not likely to happen. So that's why I started using the chalk stick, which is exactly what it sounds like, a big bamboo stick that was big enough to put a piece of chalk in the end, so that I could stand closer to where people might be standing when they accidentally stumbled across the drawing and make sure it looked 3D to them. Because that's what's important, is that it look real, even just for a brief moment, to people who are walking along the street not expecting to see art. Which incidentally is also why I don't sign my work. Because I'm hoping that even just for a nanosecond, people think they've actually stumbled upon a thing. And if you write your name on your imaginary friend's foot, it immediately is brought like, that's just something some guy drew. Now, if there's any chance that Sluggo looks like he exists, I want him to take that, even if nobody knows who drew it. If you make up a monster or an alien, people seem to think he's an alien. If you make up some imaginary creature that no one has ever seen before, however it turns out, is however it turns out. And no one can tell you that you did it wrong, which I now remember was how I kept drawing as a kid. Because if I was trying to draw something like a horse, someone could come up to me and say, that's not what a horse looks like, and I would have to be embarrassed and stop drawing. But if it's a hortopus that's half horse and but has a robot arm for no reason and a bunch of tentacles and can shoot laser beams, no one can tell you that hortopuses don't use laser beams because they don't know, and you do. And even when there's not something obvious like a crack in the ground, there's always some speck or streak or bit of gum that someone threw away or didn't throw away that creates a sort of connect the dots situation. And there's a scientific name for that too. It's called pareidolia, where your brain doesn't like random information. And so it was guaranteed to see something of meaning, usually a face, in any set of scratches and spots that you put in front of your eyes. So it's mostly about just looking for that, and then adding a few more scratches and spots until it looks more like the thing that you see in your head. Too much of the art that we experience these days is under a very carefully curated and binging situation. where we're in a famous big metropolis with a famous big museum, so we got to go to the famous big museum, spend a whole day walking through every room of that museum, stopping for the right amount of time, whatever that is, in front of every piece of art in that museum, as if there's going to be some kind of test. Like, did you stop in front of that one? If you didn't stop in front of that one, you lost. Who would want to have that be the way art influences their life? So much better to take one of those things, plunk it on the ground in front of someone while they're walking to work or to get a cup of coffee, and just have them see it when they're not in art appreciation mode. They're just minding their own business, having their own day. Whether they like it or they hate it, it's going to have an effect. And it's going to become part of that day of their life in, I think, a much more soul-affecting way than painting number 499 on the trip to the Metropolitan whatchamacallit. I'm very lucky that my community is supportive of my habit of drawing on the streets. When the art happens, it circles around in this amazing way, so that by the end of the drawing, people actually ask me to look after their kids while they go grab something at the store. And every time you get to experience that full arc, from being sort of a cast out of society to being valued by the same society in one afternoon. It's strangely therapeutic. It's intense, but it's therapeutic. I am a dutiful shirker because that clearly is what brought all of this about. That the day that I first went outside with chalk, I was shirking. I was procrastinating. I was letting my inner child run the boat, but in a way that turned out to be the most important move I ever made in my whole life.